One of history's greatest mysteries unfolds before us like a dark shadow, slowly engulfing the light. No one could have imagined that the order once considered Christianity's shield would, within mere decades, become a scapegoat and end in flames. The poor Knights of Christ and the Guardians of Solomon's Temple, as they were officially known, fell from such heights into an abyss so deep that their contemporaries could scarcely believe it was truly happening. When the walls of Acre collapsed and the last Crusader bastions vanished from the Holy Land, the Templars did not suspect that they had lost not merely a battle, but had shaken the very foundation of their entire order's existence. For 2 centuries, they were the ones who watched over pilgrims, defended sanctuaries, and amassed such wealth that even kings envied them. But what happens when a military order loses its original purpose? What happens when defenders have nothing left to defend? The story of the Templars' downfall actually began much earlier than when the first accusations were leveled against them. Everything set in motion the moment the last Crusader soldiers boarded ships at the ruins of Acre and sailed westward. The Knights of the Order and serving brothers carried the pain of defeat in their hearts, yet still lived in the belief that they would one day return. They did not know that the loss of the Holy Land had triggered a process that would ultimately sweep them away as well. They first settled on the island of Cyprus, together with the Hospitallers. The small island became their new headquarters, but Cyprus was not Jerusalem. The Templars, accustomed to the glory of great campaigns, now found themselves squeezed onto a narrow island where there was insufficient space for their dreams. The Hospitallers soon departed for the island of Rhodes, where they created their own small kingdom, but the Templars remained on Cyprus, uncertainly awaiting their fate. In Europe, meanwhile, voices questioning the legitimacy of military orders grew louder. If there was no longer a Holy Land to defend, what purpose did the Templars serve? What use was their enormous wealth, their privileges, their lands? These questions slowly spread through courts, markets, and churches. And the more people asked these questions, the more something dark and dangerous ripened. The greatest danger, however, lay not in the grumbling of common folk, but resided on the throne of a kingdom. Philip, who ruled as King of France, was a man his contemporaries called the Fair for his appearance, but who had become cold and calculating within Philip was a ruler who wished to increase his power at any cost, and did not hesitate to employ any means to achieve his goals. The French king struggled with financial troubles. The expenditures of previous rulers, wars, and maintaining the royal court consumed enormous sums. Philip had already tried to remedy this problem before, once persecuting Italian bankers, another time expelling Jews from his country to confiscate their wealth. But these were only temporary solutions. He needed something bigger, something that would solve financial worries for decades to come. And then his gaze fell upon the Templars. The order was one of the wealthiest organizations in all of Europe. Castles, lands, farms, mills, even their own fleet of ships, all stood at their disposal. In the heart of Paris, the Templars' massive fortress was not only the order's headquarters, but also a bank where nobles and kings deposited their treasures. Philip himself had turned to the Templars for loans on several occasions, and his debts continued to grow. But Philip was not a man who enjoyed repaying his debts. Rather, he thought, what if he simply abolished the entire order and all their wealth became his? This thought slowly matured within him as the years passed. However, he needed a pretext, an accusation serious enough to justify action against the Templars. The pretext came from an unexpected source. A man who called himself Squindeflexion and claimed to be a member of the order himself came forward with terrifying accusations against the Templars. He alleged that the Templars held secret ceremonies in which they denied Christ, spat on the cross, and worshipped idols. These accusations were so horrific that even medieval people found them shocking. If you've enjoyed this story about the mysterious circumstances of the Templars' downfall so far, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single episode. Share the video with those who also love medieval history. King Philip seized the opportunity. In secret, he prepared plans so extensive that even contemporaries acknowledged their organization. The king planned to strike against all members of the order throughout the country on a single day. Simultaneously, he did not want anyone to escape or learn of the plan beforehand. The chosen day was a Friday that came in the second week of autumn. Today, we know this day as Friday the 13th, and many believe it became an unlucky day precisely because of the Templars' arrest. In reality, however, the superstition about Friday the 13th arose much later, but it still reveals much about how deep a mark the Templars' fate left on European consciousness. At dawn, royal guards and troops of armed soldiers descended upon Templar properties throughout France. In Paris, at the massive Order House, just as at the smallest rural estate, everywhere the same thing happened. Order members were dragged from their beds, shackled in chains, and hauled away to dungeons. The operation was so well organized that no one escaped. Jacques de Molay, the Order's last Grand Master, who was around 70 years old at the time, was also captured. De Molay had served the Order for long decades, fought in the Holy Land, and when elected Grand Master, believed he would lead the Order's restoration. Now he found himself in a prison cell, facing accusations he could not comprehend. The list of charges grew ever longer. It was claimed that during Templar initiation ceremonies, new members were forced to deny Christ, spit on the cross, and kiss various parts of the initiating knight's body. It was said that they practiced homosexual acts within the order and worshipped an idol named Baphomet. They came forward with such shocking details that people almost dared not believe it could be true. But were these accusations truly valid? This question has troubled historians for centuries, and to this day there is no clear answer. What is certain is that most confessions were obtained through torture. The horrors of medieval torture chambers are difficult to put into words. Templars were broken on the wheel, burned with red-hot iron, stretched on the rack. Under such circumstances, almost anyone would confess to anything. One Templar named Ponsard later testified in his statement that he was tortured for so long that he finally said what they wanted to hear from him. "I would have confessed to killing God if they had asked me to," he later said when he recanted his forced confession. But how many dared to retract their confessions when they knew it could lead to even worse torture? Meanwhile, King Philip began the political game with the Pope. At that time, the Pope, called Clement V, was a weak and impressionable man who mostly carried out Philip's will. The Pope initially tried to find objections, but under pressure from the French king, finally yielded. He issued a bull ordering all Christian rulers to arrest Templars in their own countries. In England, Germany, Spain, and other countries, arrests occurred, but nowhere as brutally as in France. In many places, rulers hesitated, did not really believe the accusations, and rather only formally arrested a few order members. But in France, where Philip held the process with an iron fist, the situation grew increasingly serious. The trial of the Templars was meant to be theater that would justify King Philip's decision. Long months of interrogations, proceedings, and investigations continued. 150 Templars died in prisons and torture chambers before they even reached court. Those who survived were wasting, broken men who barely resembled the once proud knights. But not everyone gave up. Jacques de Molay, although he too had confessed under torture, later attempted to retract his admission. A leading member of the order named Geoffroy de Charny also stood up for the order. These men knew they had no chance of survival, yet they chose honor. The entire drama finally ended as King Philip had planned. The Papal Commission officially dissolved the order. The Templars' wealth was supposedly to be transferred to the Hospitaller order, but in reality most French property and wealth fell into King Philip's hands. The ruler achieved his goal. He rid himself of his debts and acquired enormous wealth. But one last act remained in this tragedy. Jacques de Molay and Geoffroy de Charny, the order's two most important leaders who were treated as the greatest culprits, awaited public execution. The execution was held on a spring day in Paris, on a small island in the Seine River. The method of execution was death by burning. The two aging knights, who had spent most of their lives defending Christianity, were burned as heretics. When the pyre was lit, according to contemporary chroniclers, Something incredible happened. Jacques de Molay, as flames already licked around him, loudly proclaimed that they were innocent and that God saw their truth. Then he cursed both King Philip and Pope Clement V, saying that within a year both would have to account for their deeds before God. This curse deeply embedded itself in the consciousness of contemporaries. And what made the whole story even more remarkable? Shortly thereafter, within mere weeks, Pope Clement V actually died. King Philip then followed him to the grave that same year in autumn. Among contemporaries, many believe this was the consequence of Jacques de Molay's curse, and this legend lived on for centuries. But what was the real cause of the Templars' downfall? Were they guilty as accused? Most modern historians believe that the accusations were largely unfounded. It is true that the Templars operated with strict, secret initiation ceremonies, and this could arouse mistrust. It is also true that they possessed enormous wealth, and this bred envy. But that they were heretics, worshipped pagan idols, or deliberately denied Christ. For this, there exists no convincing evidence. The fall of the Templars actually occurred for much more banal reasons. A king in financial straits who did not want to repay his debts. A weak pope who dared not stand up to political pressure. A society that was mistrustful of everything it did not understand. And an order that had become too wealthy, too proud, too isolated to defend itself. When we think about it, the fate of the Templars is a warning that transcends their own time. It shows that even institutions serving the most noble purposes can be vulnerable if they lose their original mission. It shows that wealth and power do not mean security. Quite the opposite. They can make you a target. And it shows that political interest can always be stronger than truth. The legacy of the Templars is viewed differently by people of later ages. Some remember them as saints who were innocently persecuted. Others are more skeptical and believe the order had indeed become corrupt, even if not exactly as the accusation stated. Still others weave conspiracy theories around them, speaking of lost treasures and secret knowledge. The historical truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. The Templars were certainly not perfect. Like every human institution, they too had their flaws and weaknesses. But what was done to them far exceeded any just punishment. Torture, show trials, political intrigues, all of this was not about justice, but about power and money. When the last Grand Master of the Templars burned at the stake, an era burned with him. The idea of the Crusades, which once inflamed Europe, was definitively extinguished. The chivalric ideals that the Templars embodied were tarnished, and there remained a lesson that even the most sacred causes can bow before political power. Today, when we visit the Parisian site where the last Grand Master of the Templars and his companion were burned, we find no memorial. The small island where the pyre stood no longer exists in the form it did then. But if we listen carefully, perhaps we can still hear the last words of Jacques de Molay echoing across the centuries. God knows who has sinned. The fall of the Templars was not just the end of one order's story. It was a signal that the heroic era of the Middle Ages had ended and a new, more cynical age was dawning, an age when people no longer fought for faith and ideals, but for money and power. The Templars became victims of this transition, and their fate remained a warning for all subsequent generations. If you've reflected on this harrowing tale and want to learn what other secrets medieval history holds, then share this video with friends, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel. Plenty more exciting stories await you about knights, great battles, and history's most dramatic turning points. See you in the next video, where we continue this incredible journey into the depths of time.